Welcome back to Behind the Haunt, where we get to the story behind the story, separating fact from fiction. I'm your host, Cassie, and tonight we are going to be going down to Radford, Virginia, to a location that is so infamous and famous that it's been on the Travel Channel and a top location for paranormal investigations to happen. There's reports of goatman sightings, a supposed native versus pioneer battle ending in bloodshed. We have Civil War or soldiers being seen on site, supposed schoolboys committing suicide because it was an awful school where there was just abuse by the teachers and by other students before it turned into a psychiatric facility where you had awful patient care and patient abuse. Reports of shadow figures and things rushing you in the middle of the night. That location is St. Albans, and we are going to be diving in, separating what is actual factual information and seeing where we can tie these reported paranormal activities to actual events. So let's dive in.
I think there's evil things here, yes.
Located on a 56-acre property on a bluff overlooking the New River in historically small town Radford sits the St. Albans Sanatorium. But before there were buildings there, we have two major events that are reported to be a part of what paranormal activity is happening. And so the first one is the Draper's Meadow Massacre. Did it or did it not happen? Well, what I could find was in July of 1755, there was a raid by Shawnee warriors on a pioneer settlement, resulting in deaths, captivity, and the famous escape of Mary Draper Ingalls. This event has been brought up throughout my research, and it's brought up in every single tour of St. Albans. However, I couldn't find anything reliable backing this up. I kept coming across articles naming Blacksburg as the location and speculation it might be the duck pond at Virginia Tech. The truth is, there are no firsthand accounts written down. All the stories have been verbally passed down through descendants, so the details have just constantly been changing and evolving. The only source that I could find that was saying that this was the location is the tour guides, and everything else is pointing towards Blacksburg. The only thing I personally could find that could maybe tie this event here was Mary Draper Ingalls' death 60 years later. That was on her family farm that happened to be in Radford. So, right off the bat, do we have a native versus pioneer battle going on? I don't think so. The only thing I could see was that the natives have used the area for travel, trade, and hunting. Otherwise, nothing involving a pioneer settlement. The next event that consistently is brought up pretty much in every investigative video and all my research was the sightings of Civil War soldiers on the property and even residual sounds. And that one I can actually verify because we had the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad Bridge built over the New River, and that was completed in 1851. And May 10th of 1864, we had the Battle of New River that included the burning of the railroad bridge. And there's nothing specifically extra to note other than there is also a nearby Civil War trail. But we do have a specific major battle tied specifically to the property in which St. Albans lies on. Now, the Civil War battle and the Draper's Meadow incident were two things that are constantly brought up prior to a building being on the property. And so that's where we get into next with the St. Albans School for Boys that was built in 1892, and it was named after the famous St. Albans School in England. It was founded by George W. Miles, who had spent 10 years as a professor at Emory and Henry College before he came in and decided to start the St. Albans School at the age of 30. He would later sell his interest in the school in 1902 and just completely leave all associations. And so within my research, it was constantly brought up that there were possible suicides and that this school had an awful reputation where everyone was just bullying each other, including staff on students and student on student. But that wasn't always the case. And we'll get into it, but let's start with the campus. The campus was originally 2 buildings, and the doors officially opened on September 19th in 1892. On opening day, there were 39 boys with ages ranging from 11 to 23. The campus could physically house 50 boys, and there was a range of day students from 20 to 30 attending, and the day students lived locally. They didn't need a room and board. They would just attend classes and then go home to their families. The 1898 to 1899 school year had a high turnover rate, with 32 of the 50 students being new. This school was meant to prepare the boys for university without the distractions of society, and there was a strong emphasis on athletics as well as languages and math. Many students came from prominent families in the South. And now, with the reports being that this was a notorious school for bullying and staff abuse, you have a large age range right in there. Like, you have 11-year-olds in with 23-year-olds. Is it possible? Absolutely. You have people in very different stages of their lives. I don't understand early 1900s social logic. But I did find some information that did directly communicate the reputation at that time. And so, looking at the Atlanta Constitution, they wrote an article that was published July 2nd of 1893, ranking St. Albans as best in America, with 4 other masters alongside George Miles, all who had came from well-respected universities, and everyone had thought very highly of George. And there was also mentions that the baseball and football coaches were also athletes, and that if your coach is also an athlete on the same team as you, I can see the competitive nature kicking in, especially with such a wide age range, because that to me is just absolutely insane. But the reputation in the beginning is good. Everyone is saying, this is amazing. This is a great thing for our boys to be turning into true gentlemen. And that's how it was for the first decade. George Miles had sold his interest and completely left in the beginning of the 1902 to 1903 school year. And after he left is when the reputation just went out the window. Radford was now referring to these boys as drunks and vandals. The school became known for supporting bullying and abuse by professors. In the 1904 to 1905 school year, only 19 boys were registered, and the school's ownership was sold at auction July 21st of 1906. And then Harry the Einstein, I don't know how to pronounce it. Harry became the new owner. He tried to rebuild, rebrand, and just fix the reputation, but the school just could not rebound. The last known register for St. Albans was the 1908 to 1909 school year. Henry would end up deeding the property to his brother William, and William would later go on to sell the property to J.C. King July 6th of 1915. Now, we see the first decade, the school was doing great. It had a good reputation. But whatever happened that either caused George to leave or had happened right after he left, it just tanked. And you can see it a little bit in their yearbook. And I did find the yearbook. I'll have it linked below. The school had their own yearbook, and that was called the Promus. And the first published edition was the 1893 to 1894 school year. And it was published every year. The 97 to 98 school year was skipped. Don't know why. 1904 was the last edition. So, one of the reports that was also coming through that was constantly coming up in my research was that someone kept saying this was a Lutheran boys' school. It wasn't at all. Actually, in the 1893 to 1894 edition of the school, it had named Baptist and Presbyterian as two other religions that were prominent amongst the boys that were attending. And also in that year, there were certain superlatives that they would be mentioned, but with no student name attached. And I believe it was like the biggest liar was the superlative, but the littlest bit of respect of not permanently tying someone's name to a superlative was upheld in the very beginning. Whereas looking at the 1904 edition, the last one, this is after Mr. Miles had left, we had superlatives where there was a teacher and coach, E.P. Holt, that was voted most popular professor, and he was regarded as handsome. And I would say that I had weird vibes from him through reading that yearbook and just flipping through trying to see what the overall student to student relationship was. And then the other big thing that I found was there was a student named E. Blackburn Rayon who got referred to as a slave to another student. And in that same yearbook, students were glad that he didn't return after Christmas. And so you can see in the beginning, there was just like a, hey, we have this superlative. We know who is attached to it. We're not printing it because that is something that could be later found later down the road. And then you look at the 1904 edition, and they're just like, yeah, that guy was just kind of doing whatever we said, and we're glad he's gone. If that doesn't tell you there was a change in the dynamic amongst the students, I don't know what would. As far as specifics, I couldn't find any verifiable reason on why Mr. Miles had left. There were some articles saying that it was cancer, but they were also saying that he died within the same year. Nothing verifiable. But I also didn't dig too deep into his life after he left. And the other thing that I would note is that in the last edition of that yearbook, there were poems written throughout where women of Radford were told to beware of the St. Albans boys. Just a little note. Yeah, they were known in town, not in the best of ways. They were known as troublemakers now. So that's where we are. Were there any suicides amongst the boys? I couldn't find anything that could verify it, but with how drastically just the environment changed in the 20 years it was open, I would not be surprised. And now the school shut down and the property got sold to J.C. King. That was July 6th of 1915. And this is where we get to the heart of a lot of the hauntings. The basics are Dr. J.C. King had bought the property in July of 1915. The two buildings were connected by a corridor and electric lighting as well as steam heat installed through the building. The sanatorium officially opened its doors January 16th of 1916 with 32 beds, 2 doctors, and 4 patients on opening day. The intention was to treat mental and nervous disorders. However, it is not uncommon for Dr. King to be delivering babies or treat stab wounds, as it was the only hospital accessible for many in the area. The next closest hospitals in the 1916 year were Lewis Gale Hospital in Roanoke and Southwestern State in Marion. And those are an hour drive away by today's vehicles and today's roadways. Southwestern State is where Dr. King came from. So St. Albans was the only hospital providing medical care and emergency services in what's reported as a 120-mile radius up until 1943. And that's when the Radford Community Hospital opens. The King family keeps its ownership until the 1990s, and all operations are moved out by 2003. And so, who is J.C. King and what exactly was his vision? He was the former superintendent at Southwestern State. His vision for St. Albans was to provide mental health treatment following a regimen featuring fresh food, occupations for the patients, gardens, orchards, and various forms of outdoor recreation. His family lived on the first floor of the sanatorium up until 1930. So this guy had big plans, big dreams for St. Albans, and it sounds well intended. The early years of the sanatorium, specifically the first 25 years, the King family is reported to have struggled financially while doing gradual expansions to the property. 1920, the circle driveway and garden is added. In between 1926 to 1956, 3 brick dormitories are added on. In 1929, we have the stock market crash that triggers the Great Depression that lasts until 1939. By 1945, the sanatorium had only seen 6,509 patients total. That's over the span of 29 years. And they had 48 staff members total within this time. Now, I couldn't find anything specific about, like, did they have 48 staff members at, like, still on site in 1945? Or was it just, like, over the years they had gone through 48 staff members? That I could not specifically find. But the rough first 25 years would eventually pan out well for them. In 1941, the Radford Arsenal and the Fairlawn subdivision is built, and the population in Radford just begins to rapidly increase. This is when the King family sees financial change. By 1940, they expanded from just 32 patient rooms to 46. And there are 40 active staff members documented at this time. In 1941, Dr. J.C. King sells his property to his son, Dr. James Peter King. In 1948, the sanatorium is officially incorporated, which pretty much is, from what I had read, it's protecting the family money from business money. It's separation. It's like doing an LLC. And so with the incorporation, the name had also changed to St. Albans Psychiatric Hospital. By 1952, there are over 200 private psychiatric hospitals in the U.S., and St. Albans is now in the lead with the number of admissions. In 1958, St. Albans had converted to a nonprofit, and by 1960, there are now 170 full-time staff, and amenities are added, including an outdoor pool. And so with the growth comes a lot of change, where unfortunately for the King family, in 1951, Dr. J.C. King passes. But in the 1960s, with more staff, they also were able to bring in more treatments. And this is what I'm finding that they are officially stating. The treatments include Nillalu therapy, which is, it's structured routines. You have your set times, like you wake up, go to bed, lunch, breakfast, dinner at these set times, outdoor time is specific time frame, etc. You have individual and group therapy, you have psychotherapy, chemotherapy, electroconvulsive, aka electroshock therapy, and that will come up later, remember it. Adjunctive therapy and recreation therapy. And adjunctive therapy is pretty much just, it's in addition to another type of therapy, like medication with group therapy kind of situation, as well as recreation therapy. In 1969, a new building is added and they call it the King Center. In 1890, the operations are moved into a new building on the western side of the property. And the institution at this time is Virginia's only fully private, full-service, non-profit psychiatric hospital. But there does come an end to an era, the end of the Kings. In the 1990s, Dr. James King sells St. Albans to Carolina Health Systems, which will be referred to as CHS for just the purposes of me not tripping over words. CHS relocates all the operations to New River Medical Center, and that is off of 81. That's a couple miles down the road, no longer at the St. Albans property. By 2001, all the medical operations are fully moved out of site, and it's just office workers that are continuing there. By 2003, all operations are officially off the original site. In 2004, CHS sells the property to Radford University. In 2007, the buildings are scheduled to be demolished but are halted by the town of Radford to be saved as a historic building. It's a lot. But there are a few discrepancies and unverifiable information that does stem from the sanatorium days. And that will kind of run into when we get to the encounters portion. But the one thing that I do want to point out is that in my research, I was seeing mostly on the tours and when other people are presenting, is they are stating that the 1945 statistics of the patient to staff ratio, they were reading it as there were 6,000 patients to just 4 staff members just at that time, when it was actually probably a misread of like that was the total amount over the years from the beginning to the year of 1945. It was 6,000 patients by then. And reality is that patient to staff ratio averages out to like 4 to 5 patients a week. It was a very manageable ratio, not very profitable, and Dr. James King is the one who had said that his parents were financially struggling in the beginning, where I'm sure part of it is due to the Great Depression, and Bradford was still relatively small up until the Arsenal and Fairlawn communities came in. And even then, the Bradford population stayed under 7,000. Did the Great Depression bring in more patients that could throw off the ratio? It's very possible. There was also the forced sterilization practice that was known in the medical field. It went on from 1924 to the 1970s, which that entire time, St. Albans was under the King family management. And during this time, we have the prime setup for everything that we today would say is like, that is so wrong. Would have been like the 1920s to 40s was the perfect time to do it without it really being protested on a wide range and in the public eye as much. Because you have to remember that women couldn't vote until 1920. And we didn't have the second round of the women's rights movements until the 60s and 70s. And then segregation in public places didn't get outlawed until 1964. And so mistreatment of patients, especially female patients, very plausible. There is no yes or no answer that I have access to. And the other thing is that our understanding of mental health and neurodivergence has only gotten better semi-recently. Because you have many reports of women that are dealing with like just postpartum depression that are deemed crazy because they said no to their husband or they couldn't do something that everyone else thought they should be able to do. And it's just all part of the growth of the mental health system that should have been handled sooner, but we are where we are today. So we made it through all of the history that I could find. How about the encounters? Let's get into that. That's where it gets super exciting. Overall, there are reports of shadow figures, a goat man, and red eyes being seen. Barry Odell of Mountain Ridge Paranormal is a witness to a physical attack that had left scratch marks, and he himself had seen a goat man on the stairs. This is a 56-acre property, and there generally is activity reported all over. But there are 4 rooms within this location that are seeming to be the hotspots of all major activity. And so in the sub-basement, there's a boiler room and the bowling alley. And on the 3rd floor, there's a room referred to as Rebecca's room with a nearby bathroom that has been dubbed the suicide bathroom. But for the purposes of today, we're just going to say it's the bathroom because it's the only one that I am mentioning while reporting this. So in the sub-basement, the reported story is that there is a man that used to bring women down there and assault them. Paranormally, it's reported to be an aggressive spirit. He doesn't like women. He charges people. There's growling heard and a lot of touching and grabbing kind of incidents. On the 3rd floor there's a story where there was a patient named Rebecca where it is unknown if she arrived pregnant or became pregnant at the hospital. But she has a miscarriage and she hides the stillborn in a jar from staff. And when staff discovered the jar, it was confiscated, and which led to her ending her own life, specifically in the bathroom where reportedly there are 3 other confirmed suicides. On the paranormal side, on the 3rd floor, people are reporting to suddenly feel overwhelmed with sadness, and there is crying heard. Now, reports of encounters are great, but without tangible evidence, it's just another story. However, because this location has been visited so many times, there's plenty of footage available online. So much that going through it all may be a future video, but for the purposes of today, I have some highlights. And so let's get into that. So for the highlights, I will be sharing some on screen as well. We'll start out with the Virginia Paranormal Investigation Team. They had posted their video November 20th of 2015. They had done spirit box sessions, but they were not reviewed on camera. And when they get down to the boiler room, they do a flashlight session and they capture on camera the flashlights turning on and off. And in this video in particular, I like that you can see where each team member is standing in relation to the flashlights. Now that was the Virginia Paranormal Investigation Team. Moving on to Spirit Seeker Society. They had posted their investigation last year, September 21st of 2025. And they start out so the first clip is going to be in the bathroom, where during the Estes method, there is an unknown sound that is captured, and you can hear crying as well. And they also do a flashlight session, and again, you can see where the team is in relation to the flashlights. And I like that you can see the entirety of the flashlight on camera, so you can see that it's no team member actually touching it. And then we go down to the bowling alley, same investigation team. They're also doing flashlight sessions and they're getting responses. And there's also a sound coming down the hallway that is captured. And I had also seen an orb that kind of came up on the camera. Now, this orb could just potentially be a little dust particle, because in another investigation, specifically one that did make it to the TV, with Destination Fear, Dakota, when he had been down in this bowling alley, he had mentioned that it's very dusty down there. So the orb could just be a floating dust particle. Now with the Project Fear team, that when they were on TV before the show was canceled, the show was Destination Fear. They had gone 2 times just with the Travel Channel. And Tanner, who's one of the members, had later done a solo after the show was canceled, and that was for their YouTube channel, Project Fear. During their first trip, while everyone's still together, there's unknown sounds captured while they're in the bowling alley. And while they're gathering gear for the solo portion, you can hear what sounds like chanting maybe, and shouting off in the distance. And that is all captured on camera. And remember, we have the known travel and hunting grounds and like trading points to the Native American tribes. Like, they're traveling through the area, and you do also have the Battle of New River sharing the same location as the St. Albans property. Now, during the solos, Tanner was up in Rebecca's room, And there was Cole, who is no longer part of the investigations from what I've seen. He's in the East Wing hallway. On Cole's camera, there are whispers that are heard on camera. And Dakota is sent to the electroshock therapy room, where there is an unknown sound right outside his room. And Chelsea was unfortunately sent down to the bowling alley, and it sounds like someone's rushing her. It's captured very loudly, and that does prompt her to quit that trip. This was the first time they had gone to St. Albans.
Hello?
So during the first trip, from the timestamps that they show, they had spent 8 hours there with 6 events that are being captured on camera. They have a second trip still with the Travel Channel, and you have Dakota, Tanner, Chelsea, and Alex. And as a group, they hear the rushing in the bowling alley that Chelsea had heard during the first trip. And they spend 10 hours on site this time. And they move from being in a group of 4 to 2 groups of 2, and then eventually to the solos the solos were 4 hours long. During their second trip, they captured 13 events on camera. And I'm not sure if I can really share the events from the Project Fear team without potential copyright, but if I am able to, I will definitely input them into today's episode. But let's break it down. So, here are my thoughts. The Virginia Paranormal Investigation Team, as well as Spirit Seeker Society. I like where you can see everyone is in relationship to the flashlights during the flashlight sessions. And I had pulled their investigation specifically because they are smaller teams in comparison to like Project Fear and like Sam and Colby. The crying and unidentifiable sounds, of course, still could be fake with smaller teams, but they have full lives outside. Like Virginia Paranormal, they do full-time jobs outside. They do this like as a weekends funsies thing. They just have an interest. So they don't gain anything really from faking it, and they also don't really have anything to lose. Like there's nothing, no reason to fake any potential evidence. And with Project Fear, they're no longer on the Travel Channel. Yes, Dakota's entire livelihood, I believe, depends on filmmaking. That's how they ended up on the Travel Channel. Dakota did used to work with Zach Baggins, but he doesn't anymore. However, his sister Chelsea has a whole job outside of YouTube and a whole family. Like, she doesn't gain anything. And so I do put their videos in. I do include their videos because I do go into their investigations with the hope and belief that they're not really dramatizing anything. Like, when they were on TV with the cuts and editing, there was definitely an emphasis on when they were getting activity. Because remember, the first visit was a part of a TV documentary. So you get 8 hours of their time spent at St. Albans condensed down to maybe 20 minutes. And their second visit was 10 hours condensed to fit into a 1-hour TV program. And so you are going to see just back-to-back activity because of cuts and edits, because why are you going to share footage of them getting nothing when you could share footage of them actually getting potential evidence? And then on another note, with like Project Fear and even like Sam and Colby kind of situations, is they do have more money into the production. They've been doing it long enough that they have more money backing them up. And so, and especially with Project Fear, you have Dakota there with a filmography background. So the sound quality is better than like this little microphone. And so you may pick up better quality sounds that you can then edit to isolate the actual activity. And when they were on the show, they had the TV budget. They don't have the TV budget anymore, but they do have their fan base and their supporters, and a lot of investigation groups do Patreon on where they can get backed by people that are wanting to see the evidence. So they're getting like those donations coming in. And also on the Project Fear side, you have professional level editing and just isolation of sounds, which, like I said, you can probably pick up a little bit more than what just a camera can capture. And so that's where I stand. I say that the Project Fear team would be on the credible sources side. I definitely believe that Virginia Paranormal and Secret Society are also on the credible side. There is no reason to make this up. And like I said, there is a ton more evidence that I have found, but that would have to be a separate video. That would have to be a completely separate video to fully dissect and get into it, and I don't know how I would do that video yet without getting into copyright issues. That would be something I would look into. But where does that leave us with St. Albans? Is it actually haunted? How much of it is bogus? Well, there is definitely plenty of activity with evidence, enough that I can confidently say this is certified haunted. The Draper's Meadow massacre has too many conflicting information to say it's a part of the hauntings, but the area was used by native tribes, and it's not a stretch that there may be some residual energy. And it is common for residual energy from the Civil War to linger at battle locations specifically. And activity stemming from when it was a school is hard. It doesn't seem like anything can specifically be definitively tied back to it. But we can tie activity to when the facility was a hospital. And if that is not a certified haunting, then I don't know what is. Thank you for joining me this week. If you've been to St. Albans, leave your experience in the comments. And if you want a full breakdown of the evidence that I had found, or even an investigation of my own, comment below, like, and subscribe. Next week we are going to the Great Dismal Swamp. Follow on TikTok and Instagram for more at Ivy Drinks Coffee. Until next time, this has been Behind the Haunt.
I think there's evil things here, yes.